Welcome to the Church Leaders Podcast, conversations with today's top ministry leaders to help you lead better every day. And now podcasting from scenic Colorado Springs, Colorado, here's your host, Jason Day.
Hello, friends, and welcome to the Church Leaders Podcast. I am your host, Jason Day, and I had the chance to meet with Steve Cunningham this week. Steve is a devoted Christ follower and entrepreneur who is passionate about leadership development. Steve is the CEO and founder of Read It For Me and has developed the GLN Skill Academy in collaboration with the Global Leadership Network, as well as other projects for growth, both as leaders and disciples. Now, you will definitely want to listen until the end, as Steve does something for our listeners that I did not expect, and I'm sure you will really appreciate. Steve and I discussed the Great Commission. Interestingly, we focus in on the second half of Jesus' command, and we talk about the difference between legalism and intentionality when it comes to spiritual growth. Steve shares insights that he has learned from some of the top leaders in the corporate world, including some commonly held myths and how they relate to anyone seeking to grow personally. It's a great conversation, and I invite you now to join me in that conversation with Steve Cunningham. Steve, thank you for joining us today, and welcome to the Church Leaders Podcast.
Thanks so much for having me. Glad to be here.
Yeah, Steve, I am really looking forward to our conversation because we're going to be sharing your story as sort of a launching point for a larger discussion around how pastors can better help the laity, the men and the women in their churches, use their skills, experiences, their expertise to really serve the kingdom. But before we jump into your story, I want to get your thoughts on something that has received a lot of attention over the past decade or so, maybe even a little longer. Many have expressed that the church, kind of generally speaking, has not done a super great job at helping people in the church. You know, that's professionals, business owners, consultants, entrepreneurs, educators, whomever it might be, people that are in the church, use their expertise and their experience and their skills and their gifts to really serve the kingdom. So Steve, just to kind of start off, and not that you're speaking for every Christ follower, in the world, or speaking on behalf of every church in the world, but just from your own experiences, do you agree or disagree that churches might struggle some with helping their people really translate their workplace skills and abilities into kingdom impact?
Yeah, I understand. Like you said, I think the important to point out that this is a focus group of one, and this is just my experience with the limited interactions that I've had with the churches that I've been involved with. I'm a Catholic, and I grew up Catholic, so my experience has been in the Catholic Church, and I think that's a very fair statement. I can't actually remember one time being asked to use any of my skills or abilities to serve in any capacity in the Catholic Church. So I think in terms of my experience, it's for me, it's almost like a weird question that you're asking. I didn't know that was something that the church should be doing. And so, but I think where you would be going next with this is, I think that would be something that I would welcome if I was asked.
Right. And the thought behind that and the idea is that as, we make up a local church, we're bringing all types of different experiences with us. And so sometimes, within the church, sometimes there can be this sort of compartmentalization. And sometimes that compartmentalization happens with us as pastors and ministry leaders, where we're really kind of separating someone's workplace experiences from their kind of church experience. And I love your story as I've gotten to know you, Steve, and to hear how you have kind of taken, and we're going to get into this here in a bit, taken just the gifts and the skills and the experiences that God has blessed you with over the years as an entrepreneur, and have been able to take those and really help serve the greater good in a variety of ways. And so, Steve, let's go ahead and jump into your story just a little bit. Can you share a bit about your church experience, like you said, growing up, and then what has happened over the last handful of years in your life?
So I grew up, like I said, in the Catholic Church. I had a typical Catholic Church upbringing. I was an altar boy. You know, our family went to church every Sunday. But I think much like many Catholics and probably many Christians around the world, it was you do your thing on Sunday and the rest of the week rolled around, and there wasn't much else done throughout the week to nurture my faith and kind of make it an everyday part of my life. So, but I grew up in the church. I kind of, like a lot of people do during my college years, kind of drifted away from the church. Was in and out of it through my 20s. And over the last few years, and I don't even have an explanation for this, although I've thought long and hard of it, I just felt a call to get back into my faith at a much deeper level. I started to go to Mass on a regular basis and multiple times a week. And I just felt called to dive into the scriptures. And around that time, I was living in Toronto, Ontario, actually a town just outside of it called Oakville, but nobody knows where that is. So I just tell people I'm from Toronto. And I made a connection here in San Antonio, where I am right now, with a gentleman by the name of Graham Weston. And that was the reason I actually picked up my family and my business. I moved here. But around the same time, I actually made a connection with a gentleman in San Antonio by the name of Mike Sharrow, who is the CEO of the C12 group, which is essentially a peer advisory group for Christian business leaders. And it was a random connection from somebody else who was a Read It For Me customer. That's my business, who was in Dallas. And so I got connected with Mike, and we were talking about providing our services to C12 for their CEOs. And as he was telling me about C12, and the idea is basically Christian business leaders get together once a month. There's a full day program. We help each other work through business issues, and there's a strong integrate. That the idea behind it is to integrate your faith into your work. And so there's a lot of encouragement around that. And so when I heard him describe it, I was like, yeah, you know what? Yeah, I like that we're talking about a partnership, but I would really like to become a member because I need this in my life. And I was just, a right place at the right time. I'm sure it's a God story. And so that helped me for the very first time surround myself with other Christian business leaders. I don't know if you know, but Canada is a much more reserved society. It's a much more secular society. So I did not have any friends that were, I grew up in Catholic church and in school. Some of my friends were Catholic when they were younger, but none of them had carried their faith into their adult years. So I spent most of my adult life not having much interaction in my friend group and my business group network with other Christians or seeing faithful Christians. And so for me, it was an amazing experience to be sitting around a table every month with a bunch of Christian business leaders. And one day I was talking through my business, and the thought just dawned on me. So we do business book summaries. So we take a best-selling business book and we pare it down to about 12 minutes and then create some animated video and audio and text. And so our original business audience for this was, aspiring entrepreneurs, executives, and in general, business leaders. That's what we were targeting it towards. And what I learned over time is that actually there's a lot of pastors in our customer base. And so that was very surprising to me because I had very little exposure to anything outside of the Catholic Church in terms of what other churches were like. And so it would never dawn on me and still wouldn't dawn on me that a priest would be a good customer for Read It For Me. But as I got to know the pastors who were our customers, it made a lot of sense to me. And so as I had many interactions with them, and they were very growth-minded people, very interested in leadership and how they're shepherding their communities. And so I really got a real deep appreciation for what they were trying to do. so through those conversations, it dawned on me that maybe we should do something like this for Christian books. If the same problem exists for business and personal development books, which is you got a stack of them sitting on your desk you can't find time for, it probably has that same, the same problem when it comes to Christian books. And so we've started down that path, and it just kind of step after step has led me deeper and deeper into my faith. And I'll finish off with the last thing that we've been doing lately, and maybe see where you want to dive in. But and for the first time, I got down to San Antonio, spending a lot of time around them, these Christian business owners who were very, very much. I don't know the right way to say this. I had never picked up the Bible and read it from front to back in my life, and nobody told me I should do it. So it just never dawned on me like that would be something that I should do. And again, focus group of one. I'm sure there's lots of great Catholic churches shepherding their people and telling them to dig into the scriptures, but I just happen not to be in those places. And so I read through, like I said, from front to back. And obviously there's many things that struck me like a ton of bricks. But the one thing that made me pause and I would say changed the course of my life was the Great Commission. And in particular, the second part of the Great Commission, which was teach them to obey all of my commands. And so for the very first time, I was reading about the fact that there was these commands, and we are supposed to obey all of them, not the ones that we feel like we should focus on right now, not the ones that we like, but all of them. And that we should not just learn them, but we need to teach other people how to obey them, which means that we need to know how to obey them ourselves. And so I took a deep dive into kind of, whenever I come across an idea, I search for books because that's just my habit. And I was shocked to find out that there was only 2 books written specifically on that topic by what I would consider to be, mainstream publishers. And one of the books was by John Piper, and one of the books was by Tom Blackaby. And so that has kind of led me into this idea of how do we, and how do I, and most importantly, learn how to go through that process of understanding what those commands are and living them out in my life. And that's led to a lot of interesting conversations with some folks who have some views about whether or not that might be a tad too legalistic. But it's been a transformational journey for me to see that there is this life that we're invited into. And it's not you need to do this because I told you to. It's you need to do this because this is the way that I've designed you to live your life. And so that is kind of been from growing up in the Catholic Church to now has been my journey, and would love to dive in anywhere you want.
Yeah. And Steve, I love the sharing your story and your journey. And I love how we can just see, as you said, that it's kind of right place, right time, perhaps, but you see kind of God's fingerprints all over it, as God is leading and guiding us and opening our eyes and revealing more and more to us and putting people into our lives, which I think is just a cool part of your story. I think we can all attest to that there have been different people that God's just brought into our lives and to journey with us and just how our eyes have been open to different things. And then, as you say, digging into scripture, right? For you, reading the Bible front to back for the first time and just your eyes being open more and more. And I've got to say, Steve, that I've talked to lots of people about the Great Commandment, or the Great Commission rather. And you're probably the first that I've ever talked to that most people focus on the go and make disciples. And you're probably the first that says, hey, man, that's actually the second part. That's what really captured my mind and my heart and sent me kind of on a personal journey. And now that's kind of impacted some things that you're doing. I'd like to get into that a little bit more in a moment. But first, I'd like to back up to this whole idea of leadership development, because this obviously, I mean, you've, as an entrepreneur, you've built your business, read it for me, around this idea of leadership development. So can you talk to us a little bit about what you have learned about leadership development and how that connects to, developing as a disciple? Where do those two things kind of come together?
Yeah, I think they actually come together quite well. And one of the things I didn't mention from my story, and this would be a good connection point, was for some reason when I came down to San Antonio, I had lunch with who became the chair of my C12 group, which is the person who leads the group. And as I was waiting for him to show up, I made the password on my phone and then the rest of my technology kit, James 1, 22 to 25. Be hearers, don't be hearers of the word, be doers, not just hearers. Mm-hmm. And so what I've learned from working with leadership development programs around the world, it's been very interesting. So when we launched Read It For Me, we thought it was going to be a service for people who wanted to be successful someday. So younger people striving to get where they want to go in their career. And what we found out was that the people who became our customers were people who were already very successful. So that was very surprising to us. And not everybody, of course, but what I'm saying is that our customer base skewed more towards that than the general population. And what I learned from them was very interesting. So I got to know a lot of our customers over a long period of time. Some of them are people that you would see in Forbes magazine. Some of them, CEOs of brands that you would know. And for whatever reason, they're willing to take my phone calls and answer my emails and talk to me about how they were using our service in the middle of their growth and development journey. And I learned kind of a few different, what I call learning myths. And as it relates to leadership development, I think learning and development overall, but the first one was that leaders are readers. I think that's a cliche that has been well worn, and it's one of those things that's kind of like a half truth. And yes, leaders are readers, and they probably read more than the average person, but they don't read anywhere close to the amount that you might be led to believe. So, you might see some things online about the average leader reads 52 books a year, and I've yet to meet one where that is true. And so what I've learned, the distinction between average leaders and exceptional leaders, is that average leaders consume a lot of information. And I would put myself in that bucket for a very, very long time. And exceptional leaders, what they do is they're hunting for the best known way to solve a problem that's related to an important goal that they have. And so I'll explain it I'll try to visualize the chart in your head. So what I learned is that when I went back and looked at the usage patterns of the people that I was talking to, the average leaders would be consistent consumers over a period of time. And so they would have a chart that would be just they have a consistent pattern of engaging in our service. And I used to think that, and then the exceptional leaders didn't. And I used to think that this was a bad thing because they didn't like it. And what I found out was that it was a very spiky graph. So there would be long periods of nothing, and then there'd be short bursts of looking at a lot of stuff, and then nothing, and then a short burst. And what I learned, what they were doing was they would have a problem come up in their business or in their personal life, and they would be hunting for ideas to help solve the problem. And that mindset actually changed the way they consumed the information, because they would go looking for these ideas. And one of my business mentors, I've already mentioned his name is Graham Weston. And so I started to try to unpack specifically how he learned differently than most people. And if you know anything about successful people, is that they don't think that what they're doing is anything different. They think everybody does it the way that they do it. And so they have a hard time trying to articulate how they do things differently. But one day he sent me an email, and the subject line said, "This is exactly what I do." And then there was an image attachment. There was nothing else in the body of the email. So I thought somebody's hacked into his computer and is sending me a virus that's going to destroy my life. So I don't know if I want to click on this, but when a billionaire sends you an email saying this is exactly what I do, you tend to bite the bullet and you open it. So I did, and it was a picture he took a screenshot of an article he was reading, and it said, if you're reading for growth, read to get answers on specific questions. And then he had highlighted further down, once you get enough of an answer to act on, stop reading and start doing. So they would very rapidly hunt for an answer to their problem. And then, if they found the answer on page 2 of a 300-page book, they put the book down and they go get an action. Whereas what I would do, and what most people would do, is, I got to finish reading this book and I got to master the concepts and the ideas. And so when it comes to leadership development, or at least leaders that are in the places eventually where you want to be, they have a much larger bias for action than average people do. They actually don't spend a lot of time consuming information. What they do is spend the time hunting for ideas, going and trying them. And then if it works, that's what they consider the learning. And they keep what works, they get rid of what doesn't, and then just keep going through this loop. And we've kind of articulated it into this idea of what we call the goal loop. And the acronym stands for goal. So I always start with what your goal is. The next one is obstacle. What obstacle are you trying to overcome? And the next one is action. What's your action plan for overcoming it? And then the learning is the last step, which is, well, what happened and what went well? Whatever went well, you keep it, and whatever doesn't, get rid of it. And so that, I think, is the biggest distinction that I've found in leadership development. And I'm happy to dive deeper into it, but it's all about doing. It's very much not about packing information in your head. And I see that in the I don't even know what we should call it, the Christian world, where it seems like it's a lot about trying to pack information in people's heads and less about getting them to go do and live the life that God and Jesus would have us live.
Yeah. And I think that's very true, that oftentimes, if we think of, within our churches, even how we structure things within our churches, oftentimes we are transferring a lot of information to people. And we feel and sense that, that if people are consuming, as you said, a lot of information, that we hope that will lead to transformation, to action. And yet that's not always the case. And so there are times that we can pull back and think, well, if we're really trying to help people develop as disciples, people who are chasing after Jesus and trying to make an impact in our world in a way that honors God, then how do we focus more on that idea of transformation, getting things into action? So Steve, I think that's a fantastic, learnings that you have had over the course of your business. And so I guess the question I have is, what suggestions would you make to the pastor or the priest of a local church to help their people just like you, to take their faith and to put it into action in tangible ways, using their workplace experiences and their skills and their expertise?
I think one of the things to point out is that even in the work world, almost everybody struggles with this same thing. So most people are not doing what I just described as exceptional people who are doing it. And so I think everybody could benefit from studying what exceptional people are doing and then just copying what they're doing. And they're doing some version of, like, they're very clear on what they want to accomplish. So they got the goal, which then creates the obstacles. And so you need to overcome them. And then the action plan, here's what I'm going to do about it. And then what did I learn, and keep what worked and get rid of what doesn't. So I think that is a very good approach for taking anything from a concept and then having it make a result in your life. And through my journey, I've kind of just been diving deeper and deeper. And first I found Ravi Zacharias, and I listened to all of his stuff that was online and in podcast form, and then a bunch of those types of evangelists, and then I eventually landed on Dallas Willard. And I don't know if you're familiar with his work.
Yes.
But he actually wrote a few books that were popular. One of them was he called the Great Omission. And his whole thing was, and this was after I had read the Great Commission and kind of latched on, like you said, to that last part. And that whole book and many of his talks was just all about taking the commands of Christ, what he instructed us to do, and just teaching people how to do them. And so I remember one of the talks he said, you could just on a Tuesday night put up a sign and say, we're going to host a 6-week series on how to be humble, and we're going to teach you how to do it. But his point was, it has not dawned on most people to do it that way. And I think my advice would be, and I'm trying to do this in my life, and I've started some groups around this, is just get clear on what those commands actually are, and then bring people through a process of them living those out or attempting to live those out, because as we know, trying to live those out is impossible. It's impossible to get them all right all of the time. No one has ever done it except for Jesus Christ. So and this is where we get into kind of those murky waters of a lot of the evangelical folks that I've been speaking to would shy away from that because it seems legalistic. But what I say in response to that, and this is the thought process that went through my head as I was reading it, is okay, well, the commission is for everybody. It's for all of us. If I'm going to teach people to obey all of the commands, first I got to know what they are. And then I have to know how to teach people to obey them, which means I need to know how I obey them. So I can't teach people to obey something if I don't know how I obey them. And what I found in trying to go through this process with some pastors and some other leaders was that when I asked them, well, what do you do around this command? Like, how do you make sure that you're humble, or how do you make sure you love your neighbor? And what I would get back was kind of like a sermon. It was, here's these scripture verses and here's what they mean. And, after they had gone through that, I'd say, no, I get that, but what do you do? And it was like crickets. And what we learned was that it's very hard to articulate something that you don't do. And what I've learned this through the leadership development stuff that we do as well. So somebody who actively does something. So to use an example from the business world, somebody who is a very good negotiator can tell you exactly what they do when they negotiate. They just, because they do it. And so similarly, if we are living out the commands, we could tell you exactly how to do it. And so I've been going through this process of just trying to get very clear on what that process looks like, and really judging myself against the bar of what do I do to live that out, not because of any legalistic desire, but out of just following the commands of our Savior. So I don't know if you're tracking with any of that, but
oh yeah, definitely.
My suggestion would be, and you just get very practical about it, and perhaps the folks in your congregation and the business leaders who do a good job of teaching people how to adopt new ways of doing things would be a benefit in that process. And you may have a lot of good disciplers in your congregation who do this kind of thing, but in the corporate world, and would thus be good at doing that through the church.
Yeah, Stephen. I think that makes perfect sense. And the legalism concern is interesting. And I understand we do always need to make sure that we, aren't becoming Pharisees, right? That we're not just getting so tied up in the law or the command that we're missing out on what the relationship means. But I think it's fascinating in your experience, and you even, alluded to this, you gave an example of this, because if we are going to grow as Christ followers, right? If we are going to be sincere in our lives about what does it mean for us to develop as a disciple and to grow as a disciple, to grow in Christ's likeness, then there must be some intentionality to it. We can't just kind of hope that if we go to church every week, if we open our Bible on occasion, whatever it might be, we can't just hope that, somehow it magically transforms us. And that's not to take away from the work of the Spirit, but it's to say that just as in, whatever, career that we might have, whatever that work looks like, if we're looking to grow in our expertise, whether we're an educator, if we're looking to be a better teacher, or if we're looking to be a better, coder, or we're looking to improve in our vocation, then we're going to be intentional. I mean, most companies and corporations focus on and have opportunities for their people to grow. And that's one of the things that they help, because they know if they help their people grow, it's going to have benefit to the organization as a whole. And so there's this intentionality behind that. And I think that sometimes when it comes to our life in Christ, sometimes we hope that it just organically sort of happens. And even as ministry leaders, we can be guilty of this by not providing some more intentional pathways for people to grow in their relationship with Jesus. And I'm a huge Dallas Willard fan as well. Absolutely have loved what his legacy is and his writings and his lectures. And Dallas really understood, the idea of spiritual formation and spiritual disciplines and this intentionality behind it. So I think that some people might cry legalism because it's getting, because they don't like they want to be more, natural or organic. But anything we do in our lives, even parenting or, a relationship with a spouse or, learning to play the piano. I mean, you have to be intentional. So I think that's an important thing that you're kind of touching upon. So talk to us a little bit more as we're kind of wrapping up. I'd love to hear a little bit more of how you are taking this idea of being intentional in your growth as a disciple. And I know you're wrapping this around the commands, but how are you helping people to do exactly what you were saying, to not just soak up some information about, the commands that Jesus has given us and that we're to obey, but for people to actually be living them out? How are you specifically doing that?
Like if when you're reading through the Gospels, Jesus was not wishy-washy about stuff. He didn't say, this prayer one time and, organically it's going to happen.
Right.
Over and over and over again, he's saying, listen to my words and you need to do them. And if you love me, you will follow my commands. If you're my friend, you will follow my commands. And so I guess in order to, and this is my take on it, I'm sure I'll get lots of flack for it, but I can't feel like I am living out the Great Commission if I don't know what the commands are, and I can't teach people to obey them if I don't know how I obey them. So that's the approach we're taking with this program that we've put together, and it's a software program that we've created that has all of the commands of Christ in it, and we created it's similar to a software program we've created for companies around leadership development and development of anybody in a company. We've created what we call a skill progression. And so it goes from 0 to 5, and 0 means I don't know anything about this. And so as I was going through and looking at all the commands, like there was a lot of zeros. Like I didn't even know what it meant. And so, and then the first level is, okay, I have read it and I understand it, which is usually where most growth and development programs start and stop. There might be some multiple choice test of, do you know what this means? and I think, in my experience, has been that that's usually where it stops in the church environment. There's information, we're supposed to understand it, and then magically the rest happens. And of course, we know that that's not the case. And so this next level, we've created this idea of what we call a personal practice, which just basically means here's how I live this thing out. And you need to wrestle with it. So we go through, we look at the verse or verses that are related to that command. We'll typically read a commentary or two around the command, and then we will, through prayer and through doing our best to discern what we are being called to do in that area, we create what we call a personal practice. And then we get together as a group once a week, and we just share with one another, here's what we have come up with for our personal practice around living out this command. And so over time, the progression goes from 2 to 3, which is, the first time you do something, you're always doing it poorly. That's just the way it is. And so there's this idea that you need, once you do something, you need to keep repeating it in order for it to become both a habit, but also to do it well. And so that's the third level. The fourth level is you've continued, when you're progressing in a skill, if you haven't changed how you do it, you probably haven't mastered it yet, because as somebody who's mastered something will continuously tweak what they're doing. And then finally, the fifth stage is I've done all that, plus I'm willing and able to teach other people. And so as we've been going through it, what we've realized is that, this is, just to get from 0 to 2 on all of these commands over the space of a year would be, it would take a lot of work, and I don't want to use the word effort, because that's one of the words that sparks the debate. But I think the your word, intentionality around it. And I've the interesting thing that I found going through this process, and everybody who's been with us on this process has found that you in fact can't do it on your own. And when you try to do it on your own, you fail. And in order to live these things out, you need to ask for God's help. And so that, and when I unpack all that experience and I go back and I read it again, it all makes sense. You ask Jesus and the Holy Spirit and God, and this way of living will and should bring you to your knees multiple times through the process. And if you're committed to following Christ, like we've been asked to do, that the whole way he described what would happen, that is what happens. And so for me, it's been a remarkable experience. It's changed the way I view all of the interactions I have with people in my business dealings, in my personal life. And it is a process of transformation. I can't describe it any other way.
That's awesome. I love how God's worked in and through your life, and how he's really taken, who you are, your experiences, your own personal growth, mentors he's brought into your life and everything else, and has helped you just continue to see, just follow him, and how your experiences and your skills are being used for the kingdom. Super, super exciting, Steve. Such a pleasure to have the opportunity to talk with you. But before we wrap up, Steve, if pastors and ministry leaders who are listening in, if they wanted to learn more about the resources that you're creating, specifically to help develop as leaders, or to help people develop as disciples, where can they find those resources?
Yeah, and we'll do this on the fly as we're talking. I'd love to offer the folks who are listening to this a free year of Read It For Me. So that's number one.
Awesome.
So let's have on the fly. Let's make up a URL, and we'll make sure it's posted by the time you air this. What should we readitfor.me / what should we make it?
Church Leaders.
Okay, so we'll go readitfor.me / Church Leaders. So that's where they can go find all about Read It For Me. We'll post some stuff about the discipleship stuff that we've been doing on that page as well, and that's where they can go.
Awesome. I love it. I wasn't expecting that, but very, very grateful. I'm sure our listeners are going to be very, very appreciative as well, Steve. So, and we'll have that link in the show notes as well as some of the other things that Steve touched upon. So you guys can check those out at the show notes for this episode. But Steve, man, it's been, again, such a pleasure to have you with us. It's so exciting to see God at work in your life and the impact that you're making. And we really appreciate all that you are doing for the kingdom, brother.
Yeah, and you as well. It's been great to get to know you a little bit over the past few months, and grateful for all the work you do as well. Thanks for having me.
Awesome. Thank you, brother. God bless you. Thank you for tuning in to this week's episode. Every week, as we are putting the episodes together, we're thinking of you, our pastors and ministry leaders, and striving to provide insightful and inspiring interviews as you seek to grow as a kingdom leader. We hope you are finding value from the Church Leaders podcast, and if so, we would appreciate you taking a few moments to head over to iTunes and leave us a review. Your positive reviews and ratings help other church leaders more easily find our podcast so they can benefit as well. Thank you in advance. And if you have any comments, suggestions, or ideas for guests, I would love to hear from you. You can send an email to podcast@ChurchLeaders.com or connect with me on Twitter. You can find this podcast as well as other great faith-based podcasts on the FaithPlay app, available for both Apple and Android. So be sure to check out FaithPlay. Until next time, this is Jason Day encouraging you to love well and lead well.
You've been listening to the Church Leaders Podcast. For articles, videos, and free resources that will help you lead better every day, visit our website at ChurchLeaders.com. Thanks for listening.